Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025. Earlier today, we had a very interesting conversation with John Lee Hooker Jr. He's the son of the famous bluesman. He's a distinguished bluesman in his own right. He has a new book, From the Shadow of the Blues, his story of music, addiction, and redemption. He's a born-again Christian in many ways, sees his religion as a way of saving him from crime and prison. And we had an interesting conversation about who gets to heaven and who doesn't. He seemed to suggest that those of a non-heterosexual bent, so to speak, might have trouble knocking on heaven's door, that they wouldn't get in because their sexual habits goes against what is ordained in the Bible. He believes he's going to get there. I'm going to show a quick clip, and then I'm going to move on to our guest today, our old friend Jon Rauch, who is perhaps the most prominent atheist Jewish skeptic in Washington, D.C., has a new book out on religion. It's called Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. But let's go to that Hooker clip first, and then we'll get John in. Do you think you're going to get in?
Do I think I'm going to get in?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I have a personal relationship with him. I gave my life to him. I preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I tell him that he's a loving Savior, and he'll forgive them for everything they've ever done. All he wants is a relationship with him. Yes, by faith, I know that the scripture says, whosoever believeth in him shall be saved. Whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Son of God shall not be condemned, but shall have everlasting life. Yes, I live for that. I live to see the day that when I close my eyes and makes that transition, I know that I'll see.
Well, let's bring in Jon Rauch. John, you just got this new book out on Christianity. It's counterintuitive on many fronts. It's called Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. In your own unique way, I think you'll manage to piss off both Christians who want to see perhaps a more fundamentalist state in the US, and atheists or agnostics who see a certain incompatibility between Christianity and democracy. So, judging from John Lee Hooker Jr.'s point, can you have a democracy in a country where Christians believe in a two-tiered system for who gets into heaven and who doesn't? I think according to John Lee Hooker Jr., you probably would struggle to get in. I probably would too.
Based on what he said in the interview with you, people like me, gay people, are condemned by the Bible. I think that means we're going the other way. And of course, I've been hearing that from Christians for years, and it's one of the reasons I grew up with a pretty bad attitude toward Christianity. I thought it was cruel and hypocritical to people like me. And unfortunately, it often still is. But if the question is, can we live with that in a democracy, the answer is objectively yes, because we have for 250 years. We've had a First Amendment, which says people can practice their religions, and many of those religions have said exactly what Mr. Hooker said. The trick is, are they willing to live in a mixed republic where we have principles like toleration and forbearance and civility and truthfulness and the rule of law? And that's where, unfortunately, the wheels have been coming off. Not so much belief in heaven or hell, but willingness to live with others.
John, some of the conservatives who reviewed your book said that you had a religion of your own that you were unaware of. I think they're pointing to your belief in the religion, if that's the right word, of James Madison. Is there an ideological foundation to the argument you make in Cross Purposes? Is the Republic your religion?
I guess maybe in a way. I don't think of it that way. Lincoln, in his first great address, the Lyceum Address, says America has a civic religion, and that religion is the rule of law and the Constitution. So if you call that a religion, I guess so. But yeah, I do have a faith and a set of values, and that's liberalism. That's, small L liberalism. You're British, so you know what I mean. I don't mean left-wing progressivism. I mean the ideas of the founders, that all men and women are born equal and have basic inalienable rights. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the Constitution, rotation in office, all of that, classical liberalism. That's my faith. My claim in the book is that that's very consistent with core teachings of Christianity, that Jesus is a lot more like James Madison than he is like MAGA. And so there's a lot there to work with for these democracy and Christianity to get closer together.
It's not surprising, because Madison was a believer. I think Jefferson was a bit more ambivalent, and he's a more complicated figure. But did Madison, in framing the Constitution and thinking out the division of powers and the separation of church and state, do you think he was using his, if not Christian theology, his religion to create this new republic, a supposedly civic republic?
Andrew, Madison is interesting and enigmatic. We know Washington was a church-going Episcopalian, and we know that Jefferson was kind of a deist. He believed in a created order, but not necessarily as a Christian. Madison didn't talk about his religion. He's the first and greatest exponent of religious liberty, and it's the First Amendment, but he didn't talk about his own faith. What he and the other founders did say is that the Constitution they gave us isn't self-sustaining, that it relies on what they call Republican virtues, things like lawfulness and honesty, truthfulness, being civically minded, civically educated. And they said that had to come from outside the Constitution. People had to bring that in from families and civil society, and of course, faith, which at the time meant Christianity and still largely does. So they were assigning Christianity a task, and that task was to teach people good Republican values. And that's kind of the problem right now.
But the Christianity, John, of Madison and all the founding fathers was a particular kind. It wasn't a Roman Catholic Christianity. It was a Protestant one, perhaps even a Puritan one of self-control. So could one argue that, so to speak, the ideology of Protestant America permeated the Constitution, that this promise of the separation of church and state in practice and theory never really happened, that the ideals of self-control, of self-discipline, of all the other Lockean or elements of the foundations of America were somehow incorporated into the Constitution and the political system?
Well, I guess it's a hybrid. There were people at the time of the Constitutional Convention who lobbied very hard to have Christianity named as America's religion. And they wanted to see the name of Jesus Christ in the Constitution, and they lost that argument. They actually lost it soundly. The founders didn't want to go there. They really believed in a country that, although informed by the values of Christianity, was tolerant of and welcoming to all faiths. And that was a breakthrough at the time. What they did think is that religion had an important part to play in sustaining the values of democracy, and those are the ones we talked about. And that's what people like me forgot for too long. We just took the values for granted.
John, has the argument changed over the last 250 years? The arguments you've noted between, some people might use the word Christian fundamentalists, certainly people who believed, who were skeptical of a separation between church and state, who wanted to create a more Christian state, and secularists like Madison and Jefferson and the founding fathers. Has anything really changed in terms of the intellectual parameters of the debate that now exists between certain evangelical churches and right-wing Republicans and liberals like yourself, small L?
I'm not a professional historian, So I don't want to get too far over my skis, excuse me. Yeah, a lot's changed, but it's kind of cyclical. It turns out that in the age of the founders, a lot of people didn't go to church at all, especially the less educated class. But you had a series of great awakenings, which brought more people into the church in a big wave in the first half of the 20th century. And then there was a big de-churching that started in the mid 20th century with the mainline churches and is now, it's just decimating the white evangelical churches in America in this century. So, we've always had this tug of war between the secularizing forces of capitalism and democracy and consumerism and individualism and all of that on the one hand. And on the other hand, these churches and faiths. And that's never going to change.
But is there something in between? Of course, the most influential book on religion in the United States was Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. You seem to have discovered a middle ground in your analysis of Mormons, of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Is this a tradition within American civic and theological culture which brings the two worlds together, that ends the two arguments, this extreme atheism or extreme religious absence of church-state division?
What the Latter-day Saints are doing right now is very interesting and very countercultural, which is building a new entente with secular democracy. It's very different from what white evangelicals are doing, and for that matter, with what the U.S. Conference of Bishops, that's the Catholics, are doing. They are saying, look, we want space in our church to do the things we think are important. And it's a conservative church, so they are against same-sex marriage. They are against homosexuality. You can be excommunicated for being in a gay marriage. But they're also saying, outside the church, we want to help make compromises in law, in the public sector, allowing for pluralism, and they actually supported, they helped push through the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022, which enshrines my marriage to a man in federal
it's even
law.
being reported on Fox. They haven't mischaracterized them.
And this is very different. The white evangelical church, the bishops, they said, of course, we can't support anything about same-sex marriage. This is terrible. But the LDS's church is saying Jesus wants us to share the country. Now, they're a historically persecuted faith. They have living memories of their, great grandparents being persecuted. They know about this. But they also have traditions of tolerations for other religions that go back to the times of Joseph Smith. And they've developed a whole theology around why Jesus Christ wants them to be peacemakers in society and help with these civic compromises that deconflicts the public sector so that more different faiths and secular people can get along. And I looked at that in the book because, Andrew, it's so different. And yet it is what Christ teaches.
Well, it's one version of what has always been debatable, but I'm not expressing myself perhaps as clearly as I'd like, John. My question really goes back to Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Aren't the Mormons the perfect manifestation of that? Their way, it's a religion of hard work, of moral cleanliness. The Utah is a very wealthy state. They're a very wealthy community. In other words, aren't there more important socioeconomic, class, cultural realities behind all this religion?
I depart from a lot of people. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think theology really matters. I think if you want to understand a religion, the first thing you should do, not the only thing, of course, you should look at race and class and sociology and demographics and income and all of those things. But the first thing to look at is their teachings. And the LDS Church has had for a long time some very interesting teachings about free will, what they call agency. And they're teaching by the way, every Latter-day Saint, that's what they call themselves now. They don't like Mormons anymore. Every Latter-day Saint knows this. When I was out in Utah, I heard all the time about agency. And agency is the idea that not only do we have free will, the capacity to make choices, we need agency, which is the opportunity to be confronted with choices that are both good and bad. And we can only grow morally if we're presented with opportunities to make the wrong choice. And from that, it's a very short hop to the idea that we don't want to live in a society where we dictate what everyone has to do about homosexuality. We want to leave those choices available. So I look at that and say, sure, Max Weber, fine. Look at all that stuff. But that teaching shows one way you can get to a civic theology, a kind of Christianity, a kind of faith that actually does align with a divided country and maybe reduce the divisions. But I don't know, sounds naive, right?
But I don't understand. Explain what the Church of the Latter-day Saints think about agency when it comes to somebody like yourself. Would they argue that your homosexuality is something that you could change, that you're a prisoner of, that you were born gay? How does agency play itself out in the way in which they view the world, particularly the world of others like yourself?
I don't know in any detail their teaching on homosexuality. I know that I think it's wrong. I have told senior church leaders that I thought it was wrong. I wasn't obnoxious about it, but I said they were at one point on the verge of excommunicating a true servant of the church who had decided to marry his life partner. And I said they fortunately didn't excommunicate, but I said that can't be what the right answer is, to excommunicate a servant of the Lord who wants to live in a lifelong loving relationship. I don't know why they think that homosexuality is wrong, but they do, very much like the musician that you opened with.
John Lee Hooker Jr. Well, he doesn't actually think it's wrong. He just says that the Bible says it's wrong.
Well, that means it's wrong as far as he's concerned. But, I guess I feel like, I think that belief is inhumane and incorrect.
No, I take your point, but what do they say about it? So coming back
so they think homosexuality is wrong, but they also think we should live in a society where people are allowed to make choices that they think are wrong. They don't want to impose that on the rest of society. They want to say everyone should be able to make this decision for themselves. And that's different from what you hear from a lot of other conservative denominations.
The Church of Latter-day Saints have a very checkered history, to put it politely, mildly, on race and African Americans. How does that play out? Have they changed their position? I know you spent some time talking to Dallin Oaks, who I think is the number 2 guy in the church and perhaps about to become the number 1 guy. Have they changed their ways on race?
Well, they changed their ways on race. They had a revelation in, I think it was 1976. And the revelation was a big change on religion, on race. They have not changed on women. Women still cannot be priests. The priesthood in their church pretty much includes all men. And they have certainly not changed their teaching on homosexuality. And yeah, there is a past there which has a lot of darkness.
Or a present. I mean, John, what are you doing as a hardcore liberal Jewish atheist, using the Church of Latter-day Saints, who only 50 years ago changed their mind on race, let black people into the church? You still haven't changed their mind on women. What are you doing promoting these people?
I think they're doing something important in our culture right now. I think they are showing the way toward a kind of Christianity that says, instead of taking partisan sides, joining the culture wars, fight, what one pastor I talked to called the battlefield mindset. They are modeling a peacemaking model, which says, let's make room for others. It is, I want to emphasize the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. They helped push through an act of Congress that established my marriage in federal law in case the Supreme Court ever changes its mind about same-sex marriage. They helped write that into a statute, even though they disagree with it. As part of that, they also got religious liberty protections that help allow their church to remain outside of same-sex marriage. But that's, I think, the way you deconflict society. And they do that because they think, as President Oakes puts it, patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation are what Jesus Christ wants them to do. And I look at that and say, well, that's also what James Madison wants me to do. So there's a connection there. There's something we can do together.
And how do they differ from some of the more evangelical churches that you and many others, like your friend Pete Wayner, are very, very critical of? What's the difference between the Church of Latter-day Saints and some of the, especially the white evangelical Christian groups who are very much on the MAGA bandwagon?
The conservative evangelical church views compromise as a four-letter word. They believe that they are embattled, they are fearful of losing their place in the culture, of losing their prominence demographically. They see the larger society as an enemy force, and they have hunkered down, increasingly aligned with the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, and their church is shrinking at an alarming rate, partly as a result. So it's actually kind of the opposite direction of the way the Latter-day Saints are going.
Well, let me put my Weber hat on again, or maybe even my Marx hat. Isn't the confidence of the Church of the Latter-day Saints a reflection of the fact that these people tend to be well off and successful economically and not under threat? So they can afford, so to speak, literally and metaphorically, to be more forgiving. Whereas some of these white evangelical churches, particularly in the South, of poor whites, are much more under threat. So it's not exactly surprising that their religion is more aggressive and more intolerant. Or is that a wrong way of thinking? I mean, we keep coming back to you value theology and I value sociology here.
Well, I suppose there's room for both. I don't know that Latter-day Saints are all that wealthy.
Well, they are, John. The numbers are there.
Yeah,
I didn't do the research, but they're an astonishingly prosperous community, and it reflects also perhaps their moral cleanliness, the issue of agency.
So yeah, I just don't know. It's not something I've looked at, but no, I don't think that's where they're coming from. Remembering this is a church with living memories of persecution. This is a church whose founder was assassinated. And then whose assassins got away scot-free. So I don't think they have a story about feeling super secure in the American Republic. So no, I don't think it's an economic factor.
So you don't think economics has anything to do with this? It's just theological, one way or the other. There are certain people who have bad ideas, the evangelical MAGA people, and there are certain people who have better ideas, the Church of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, I just don't think religion boils down to money in America. You know, I'm sure that's a factor, but to me, it's not the factor that interests me, and I don't know that it's the motivating factor.
So you don't agree with Weber's premise of the Protestant ethic of the intimate relationship between capitalism and religion?
I don't know. It's not a thesis I've explored.
Well, let's move on to the other side then. You managed to piss everybody off, which is why I like you. Some of the evangelical Christians, of course, don't like you, but also the hardcore atheists, because I think what you argue in cross purposes is that democracy depends on Christianity. In other words, if we all became atheists, if we all became Jon Rauches, then our democracy wouldn't be very strong. Is that what you're arguing?
That's the empirical claim. You know, I thought 22 years ago, I wrote an article celebrating secularism and saying, isn't it great that religion is on the decline, and that'll make us a less divided and dogmatic society, and we'll all be like, Scandinavia.
Denmark.
And Denmark, yeah. We can't get through an episode without mentioning Denmark. And I was wrong. It turned out that we still rely heavily on Christianity to do the work of anchoring communities and helping promulgate core values, Republican virtues, the founders called them, to communities and to kids. And that when the Christianity is still a load-bearing wall, and when it collapses, people go to substitute religions, pseudo religions, things like wokeness and MAGA and QAnon, and also wellness and Soul Cycle and all kinds of things. And none of those really do the same job of creating connection and a sense of transcendence and having a deep wisdom literature that goes back for several thousand years. So I just think empirically, Andrew, I kind of wish I'd been right in some sense that, we'd just be fine in a world without religion. But all the indicators that have to do with community and with mental health and loneliness and connectedness, and especially indicators having to do with anger, have gone south in this period of secularization. Not just because of religion. You're going to say it's the cell phones, and fine, it's a lot of things. But the collapse of the church, I think, has just put a real strain on our democracy. So I find myself telling you, atheists need to care about the health of Christianity.
It's an odd argument given who you are. As I said, the conservatives have suggested that you're unaware of your own religion and your own perhaps liberal religion permeates your work. But as you say, you're an atheist. You don't believe in anything, and yet you're a very moral person. You're a very good citizen, perhaps the best citizen I know in the United States. So aren't you an argument against your own argument, your own personal life?
Yeah, but I'm weird. And I suppose I'm a moral person. But I also, a understanding that I came to very gradually and quite reluctantly. I used to think religion's a crutch and I don't need it, and bully for me. I came to see that there are lots of people who are attuned to a kind of spirituality that gives them a kind of depth in their life, a sense of additional meaning and purpose that does not interfere with their daily functioning. They can be Francis Collins, one of the great scientists of our time, who does not go to the lab looking for miracles. And yet they have access to this other realm. So I came to think, in a sense, I'm not smug about this anymore. I feel like, in a way, I'm missing out. I do fine. I'm happy being who I am. I don't, kill people. I'm not a Nietzschean nihilist or anything like that. But I think faith is a kind of gift, and it's not a gift that I was given.
What do you mean it's not a gift that you were given?
I
Given
knew
the issue of agency. I mean, you seem to be suggesting that religion is wise. It makes you happier. It's good for the country. So why don't you just become religious?
Because I don't think it's true. And you have to think it's true. So from very young, I even tried at one point, but some of my earliest memories are thinking this whole God stuff is silly.
But the great Christians, John, none of them think it's true. From Augustine to Pascal to probably even Jesus Christ, they all know it's not true either. I mean, to be a good Christian, you have to be a skeptic, don't you?
You have to. So I'm now relating what Christians tell me because I'm not one. Are you, by the way? You're not religious, are you?
No, I hope not.
So Christians say, the Christians I respect, there's lots of other kinds of Christians, but they say doubt is part of faith, which is hard for me to understand. But they say that real faith means constant questioning and never being too sure. Now, I have trouble holding that proposition in my mind. I think that once you introduce God and miracles into the world, that nothing makes sense anymore, because why not just explain everything with a miracle? If someone can die and then suddenly the second law of thermodynamics can go into reverse and all those decomposed cells can somehow magically reform themselves into a living human, then nothing we know about science is right. So I don't get that, but they do. So what can I say except this seems to be very good for a lot of people who aren't me?
John, there was an interesting piece, I think it was in the Washington Post today, about this natalist movement, these people now having more and more children. We had Margaret Atwood on the show a few years ago. Of course, she was most prescient in Handmaid's Tale. Is there an alternative political system, as opposed to just angry Christians hating everyone, offering an alternative to democracy? Does the work of people like Patrick Deneen, does it actually represent a coherent political doctrine which offers an alternative political system in 21st century America?
I don't think so. You may have had Mr. Deneen, Professor Deneen, on your show, and I'd love to know how he answered that question. But no, I think there's this whole school of post-liberals, and they blame me for the decline of Christianity.
You personally, or people like you?
Yeah, people like me. They say that you can't really have faith and family and community and patriotism in a consumeristic, individualistic, liberal society. It's just too morally disordered, and it just demolishes efforts to have faith and family and tradition. So they say that, but they don't really have an alternative to the U.S. Constitution or to pluralism. Solutions that they propose look, very much like things that you could do right now under the Constitution for the most part. So I don't really think that they have much to offer. There's something to their critique. It is hard to be a person of faith in a very consumeristic, individualist culture. That's always been true. The problem for Christians, I think, is that it's going to be very hard to attract people to your faith when what they come, if what they hear is hard-edged, bitter, angry fear and partisanship. That's driving them away in droves.
But what about the Bannonite argument, a kind of relatively unambiguous religious embrace of illiberalism or neo-authoritarianism? Is that an alternative system that you fear in a MAGA America? Is that conceivable? Where, going back to Margaret Atwood, where, women are viewed as machines for producing babies, guys like you end up in jail or probably executed, people like me get thrown out of the country.
Andrew, I don't know what Steve Bannon is proposing. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what Elon Musk is proposing. It's very
he's not a
different
religious. I don't think Musk. He's many things, but I don't think he's a religious.
I don't know that Bannon is either. And
well, he claims to be though.
Yeah. Well, whatever. But Christian nationalism, people who study it all agree it's not Christian at all. It's not really faith-based. It's really a political ideology that appropriates Christian symbolism for what is in fact a political agenda of.
But aren't you falling here, John? I don't mean to keep on interrupting, but you're a friend, so I can. Aren't you falling into the very trap you accused me of? You said we have to treat these people according to the ideology they articulate. I was trying to dig beneath some of your ideas to get to Weber and the Protestant ethic. So don't you have to give? I mean, I don't like Bannon any more than you do, but don't you have to give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of his theology and his view of religion and the state?
I don't know what his view of religion is or that he has any. So if it's explained to me, I'd be happy to comment on it. What I see when I read him is this kind of nationalistic populism and a belief that he speaks for the voice of the common man. I don't know what that is. But when I think about Christianity, so the core of my book, Andrew, is it's a substantive claim. And it says that this is not, by the way, something I invented. This is something that Christians say, that if you had to describe Christianity standing on one foot, as it were, you would say it has three core teachings, and that they all come through in the teachings of Jesus Christ. The first is, don't be afraid, the most frequently repeated injunction in the Christian Bible. The second is, imitate Jesus, who was an egalitarian. He was concerned with the least of these. He believed in never using human beings as ends, as means to an ends, but always as ends unto themselves. And the third was, forgive each other. What I see in MAGA world and the MAGA church is full of fear of declining influence, declining demographics, losing their country. I don't see imitating Jesus. I see a lot of very anger and bitter and often abusive behavior on social media. I see a celebration in politics of cruelty. And then forgive each other. That's very different from Trump's message. I am your retribution. So what I'm seeing out of all those people is the opposite of what James Madison preached and the opposite of what Jesus Christ preached. And my message is that Jesus Christ's teachings are a whole lot more like Madison than they are like MAGA. So that's where I'm going. I think Steve Bannon is going somewhere else.
So what, John, should atheists do who share your concern with the fate of the Republic? Should they join the Church of the Latter-day Saints?
No, no one should believe or do anything that they think isn't true. I do think, there's a lot of ink in the book criticizing white evangelical church for getting itself politicized and secularized and magnified and all of that. But there's also some stuff about people like me. I think I took faith, the underpinnings, the structures that faith had given us, the infrastructure, so to speak. I think I took it for granted for too long. I think I thought that it was, to the extent that it was a load-bearing wall in democracy, I assumed that it would hold. I don't think that I and my secular liberal friends were curious enough about faith. I don't think we considered it when we considered diversity in our universities and workplaces. I think secular people tried too hard and too rigidly in some cases to separate the church from the public square. I think we made a mistake when, for example, we decided anti-discrimination laws might mean that every single cake baker in the country has to bake a cake for same-sex wedding. I think we can make accommodations for that with that minimal sacrifice to ourselves. So I think there's a lot we can do to make the civic sector more welcoming to people of faith, and I'm going to try harder on that score. It's not the answer. It's not going to fix the other problems that are going on that we're talking about, but I don't know, might help.
So it's more Madison than Jesus Christ.
Yeah, for me. But I feel like I'm coming to where, for example, Latter-day Saints and some Christians, I should say, people like, you've heard of David French and
and
Russell
you're
Moore
a good friend of French. In fact, you did something with him about you had a New York Times.
Yeah, he interviewed me about this book. Michael Ware, for example, who worked on faith-based initiatives for Obama, and the late pastor Tim Keller, and there's a lot of Christians in America who are having second thoughts about the direction the church has gone and view it as unchristian.
Well, Peter Wehner, I mean, you've co-written stuff. Yes. He's been on the show many times. He, to me, is about the best moral conscience, religious conscience in America. And
he takes Jesus Christ very seriously. That's where that's coming from in his case. So I look at Christians like that, and there are quite a few, and I think more are being coined every day by the politicization of the MAGA church. And I just like to hope, it has nothing to do with me, it's their church, not mine, but I just like to hope that some of those people can begin to rebuild from the bottom up. And Russell Moore says that if there's hope, that's how it happens. It's, not an apocalyptic conflict between the MAGA church and the anti-MAGA church, and they wage some kind of war. He says it's going to be the bottom-up renewal of the church as has happened in the past. It's going to be grassroots, new generations of parishioners.
Another reawakening. What is it? This will be the third or the fourth one?
Fourth, I think. Yeah, but he says it'll be like the small groups and the pastors and the younger people who get interested in the actual teachings of Jesus, and that will begin to attract a following. So is it like, I don't know, you tell me. Is it devoutly to be hoped for? Yes. Do secular people like me have a stake in it? Very much so.
Well, you're calling for a political realignment. You've always been a centrist. So is this a centrist, secular, religious realignment that you're calling for? Certainly an alternative to the Republican Party. but not falling into some of the perhaps wokeness of the Democratic Party?
So for me, it's all part of my project, which you and I have discussed many times on the show and in person, of figuring out what's gone wrong with the great liberal democratic experiment and trying to fix it, because it's clearly in trouble right now. And one of the things that's gone wrong, I think, is this misalignment of Christianity and liberal democracy. And so this book is attempting to say, okay, is there a way through Christianity, through the teachings of Christianity, to bring Christianity and secular democracy closer together and maybe make both of their lives a little bit easier?
Well, it's called Cross Purposes. I joked earlier, John, that I wouldn't call it cross-dressing, but I couldn't resist that joke. Let's end with John Lee Hooker. If he's right, John, and guys like yourself are not allowed into heaven, would anyone actually want to go to heaven where there are no gays? I mean, what's the point? It wouldn't be a lot of fun, would it?
I don't believe in heaven, and the visions of it that I've heard haven't been especially appealing to me. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I'm going to be in hell with you, that's for sure. I'm not gay, but I would much rather be with you than a lot of Christians, but maybe that's my own problem. Jonathan Rauch.
I'll see you there, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of fun. Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy, a classic Rauchian counterintuitive argument on both fronts against left and right. Fascinating stuff, John. And we will get you back on the show in the not too distant future to talk more about the fate of American democracy. So congratulations on the new books, getting a lot of press, and we'll talk again in the not too distant future. Thank you.